You asked me to introduce myself. My name is Bencie Woll. My name sign is demonstrated it. I'm a linguist and I research sign languages. I started a long time ago uh, doing research on sign language, but it's now broadened, so I do research on lots of areas connected with deafness and deaf people. That's interesting. A question about applied linguistics. I had started with theoretical linguistics. I did a BA and an MA, and I started doing research with child language acquisition in hearing English-speaking children. And I have to say I was becoming bored. Then a new person started in my department, and they were really interested in sign language research and asked me to have a look at a research proposal they were planning to submit. And I looked at it, and it looked really interesting because at that time there was no research on BSL. So I said, but you don't know enough to do this research. And he said, well, if you're interested, why don't you get involved and apply for the job? And I, I was feeling bored, so I thought, yeah, I'll change. And that suited me ever since. So the question was, how does my research impact on studies linked to bilingualism and applied linguistics? I think the primary link to bilingualism is helping people begin to think about the issues of how two languages work together. If they occur in different channels, for example, one spoken and one sign, or even thinking about bilingualism in two different sign languages. And that should change people's perspective on what's demanded in bilingualism through research, and also help people who are involved in teaching and writing about bilingualism to really think about bilingualism and the demands having to do with channels, not just with two abstract linguistic systems. So how does my research impact on uh, teaching languages, bilingualism in the classroom, and so on? I think one thing that's important is thinking about deaf children in mainstream schools, in a classroom. And you start to think, how does that child access information? Perhaps the child has an interpreter in the classroom. So how does the teacher teach foreign languages to that child? How What's the influence of an interpreter or a communication support worker in the class? How does that impact on the other children's experiences? So one starts to think more visually about language, perhaps. Maybe teachers will begin to use examples from sign language in their teaching. So I think influence can occur in many different ways. How could teachers start using this? Well, they might incorporate research in their classroom, perhaps by asking a deaf person to come in and talk about their language experiences. It would also be useful if teachers, for example, looked at text they're using and seeing whether they're actually representing sign language appropriately. And of course, they could think about learning BSL themselves. Um, Perhaps even learning it to a stage where they might be able to offer teaching in BSL to children in their school. I always say I get very disappointed when I look at applied linguistics and linguistics texts, and the only mention they have about sign language is about apes learning sign language, nothing about deaf people and their language. So I think there's a need for more information. Uh, I think it's something that children find really interesting, and I think it's a way to improve um, the everyday lives of deaf people, to not just help, um, hearing learners.